Tonight, we're learning more about the allegations of discrimination and harassment made against the president of Central State University. I'm Gabrielle Enright. James Brown is off. The university confirmed with our I-Team that an outside law firm is investigating these claims. The accusations came from a group of current and former employees. WHIO TV tonight's Brandon Lewis has been working the past month to get answers. Here's what he's learned tonight.
These allegations made against President Dr. Jack Thomas first got on my radar last month, and it took several phone calls, emails, and even a public records request to confirm that these complaints are being looked into. I was sent a confidential email. It claims several Central State University current and former employees are accusing the president and his administration of committing employment law violations. Hey, this is Brandon Lewis from Channel 7. After some digging, I found one of the people making these accusations. Her lawyer told me he's representing 5 women, both current and former employees, who sent a letter to the school's Board of Trustees last August, outlining their complaints against the university's president. Through a public records request, the I-Team received a copy of that letter. It claims Central State's president, Jack Thomas, set the tone for discrimination, wrongful termination and demotions, harassment and intimidation, pay inequities, slander, and a toxic work culture. It went on to say women in high-level and leadership positions have either resigned, been terminated, and or demoted since Dr. Thomas's tenure started in July of 2020. The 5 women also claimed they had their titles and positions stripped away, took pay cuts, and were replaced by less qualified individuals. All this caused them severe mental, emotional, and financial stress. I reached out to Central State about the claims. The university's Office of General Counsel and Board of Trustees said, as a result of the complaint and at the request of the university and the Board of Trustees, the Taft Law Firm has been appointed as special counsel to conduct a comprehensive investigation on behalf of the university into the allegations contained in the letter. I also requested an interview with Dr. Thomas, but the school said it's not publicly commenting at this time. Mark Hatcher, the chair of Central State's Board of Trustees, released a statement that said, in part, the Board of Trustees has full confidence in President Jack Thomas and his vision for the university. Under Dr. Thomas's tenure, enrollment is higher than it's been in decades, with more than 5,300 students. The board is committed to ensuring the excellence and integrity of Central State University on behalf of its employees and its students and their families. The lawyer for the 5 women told me over the phone he and his clients are not giving any interviews as the investigation plays out, but they've been pleased with how it's been conducted so far. No word yet on how long this investigation will last, but we'll let you know once we learn anything that comes from it. In Wilberforce, Brandon Lewis, News Center 7.
And here's what we know about Dr. Jack Thomas. According to Central State's website, he's the 9th president of the university. He took office in July of 2020, and he came to Central State after nearly a decade as president of Western Illinois University.